So one thing, or rather two things, that people were very, very excited for going into FF7 Rebirth was how the game was going to handle Cid and Vincent. Just sort of a general curiosity. We had known prior to the game's release that they would not be playable characters, much like Red 13 in Remake, so how exactly would they be properly integrated into the story? Now, I totally get why the developers made the decisions that they did. It's just some aspects of it really makes me raise my eyebrows a little bit. So I just want to kind of talk about the good, the bad, the interesting, everything kind of related to Vincent and Cid in particular, just because all their story stuff is so minor and is kind of scattered across a couple chapters. Also, this video contains spoilers for FF7 Remake, FF7 Rebirth, original FF7, the Star Wars sequel trilogy. So I keep often talking about with Rebirth how Square Enix just is solving problems that it created for itself by splitting its remake project across 3 games. And you can definitely feel that the most here with how these characters are handled, that they really want to stay true to the original and just sort of the general sequence that you meet these characters. From a bit more fair game designer perspective, I guess you could say that including Vincent and Cid earlier would really encroach on Yuffie and Cait Sith and Red 13, developing their characters and sort of understanding them and their gameplay, etc., etc. Although between you and me, this whole character is introduced too late to become playable narrative got absolutely shattered when Zack got included in the final battle of Rebirth. Just totally shattered. Good thing there's not a 4th game where they could pull this trick on us again. But also the more cynical reason that Square Enix needs a reason to sell Part 3, so they kind of have to hold these characters back. And it's not just enough that there's new mechanics and new story moments and awesome new boss fights. Okay, so if they can't be playable, why are they even in this game in the first place? Why not just punt them to Part 3? We have some more space to maybe develop some other narratives, set up some other plot threads or something like that. Well, that kind of brings me to the other issue being the original FF7 being source material. So you know how Star Wars fans, one of their big complaints with the sequel trilogy is that there wasn't a scene with Han, Luke, and Leia in their older age, interacting with each other as one big last send-off, and how it was this massive creative failure on the part of all of the people working on these sequel trilogy movies, that Han's now dead, Luke's now dead, Leia's gone, and Carrie Fisher is gone, so you can't really get everybody back together. If FF7 fans had kind of a similar thing happen to them, that would pester Square Enix 1,000 times worse than Star Wars fans. Could you imagine a version of 7 Rebirth where it was Vincent and Cid were not in the party at some point and they only joined after Aerith died? Just people would tear Square Enix to shreds. So Vincent and Cid are essentially just over-glorified NPCs. What really separates them from, say, the random person in Costa del Sol is that they'll hang out with your party. They'll be in certain cutscenes, or they'll hang out at certain ports or around certain areas, but they really don't have that much going on. It's very similar to the treatment that Red 13 got at the end of 7 Remake. But I think people are way more put off by Vincent and Cid than Red, and I thought about this a lot, and I finally put my finger on why that's the case. It's just the amount of freedom that you have in the game at the points that you meet both of these characters. Red 13, you're on a very linear path when you meet him, so there's not really an excuse to be hey, why is this character not playable? You meet him at the end of Chapter 16, Chapter 17, you're going through Hojo's lab, and then Chapter 18, you're fighting the final boss. But when you meet Cid and Vincent, you still have a good amount of freedom in Rebirth, especially when you meet Vincent, and then you go to Chapter 12, and you can go do literally any piece of side content in the entire game, and they'll just stand there in Costa del Sol. Out of the 2 characters, I think Cid was way better handled and more naturally integrated into the game than Vincent. Given Cid's nature as an aviator and eventually having to man his own boat, he just becomes another form of fast travel in the game. In fact, one thing I really noticed with Cid is that they really did a good job most of the time of like de-emphasizing Cid in particular. He's there and he does his bits and stuff like that, but he's not the main focus. He's not really trying to draw attention away from the plot or the story. Really the only part where I think they make Cid seem way more important unintentionally to someone who maybe didn't play the original FF7 was one, his actual reveal, because I kid you not, they reveal him like an MCU character, like a full body reveal with his face with like the music all triumphant and blaring. And however, I can't really talk about Cid without talking about like his overall characterization in the game and just how people are just kind of stirring up a bunch of like discussion and like controversy, for lack of a better term, over essentially what's a nothing burger. Because I see a lot of people online wondering, hey, why is Cid not being an outright jerk like he is in the original game? He actually seems like a pretty nice guy, all things considered, in the events of this game. They totally ruined his character, right? And I'm just like hitting my gun against the wall and I'm like, guys, it's super obvious why he's acting like this. I don't know how you don't get it. Cid, when you meet him, is a small business owner. You are paying him money for a service to fly to a place. You don't be mean to customers. It's a little bit more shaky justification when he's like ferrying up the party to Temple of the Ancients in chapter 13, where the game kind of justifies it like, oh, Cid's such a great and nice guy. He's gonna ferry around the party for free because he has such a big heart of gold, man. I mean, we've all seen the trope a million times in movies and TV and everywhere in entertainment of the jerk with a heart of gold. And OG FF7 Cid definitely kind of fits into that mold. And it does feel a little weird that they're kind of skipping the jerk part and the jerk with the heart of gold straight to the heart of gold. And I do feel like it will be retroactively sort of brought into his character in part 3 as like maybe a reason why the party even puts up with him once he starts really being a jerk with the Rocket Town stuff, that they say, oh, well, this guy like did all this stuff for us, like, yeah, he's being a jerk, but we really don't have any other options. He's the only other pilot. But even with all of the edges completely sanded off to minimize his importance, Cid still definitely comes across as a little bit thorny and a little bit interesting, a little bit flavorful, right? I think about that one exchange where Cid talks about how he used to work with Shinra and he still does for Bronco Airlines. And Barrett has a problem with it, and Cid's like, you got a problem with that, dude? Get off my boat. And I love it. I love it so much. One thing I really appreciate is that Cid spends a good amount of his limited screen time talking one-on-one with Aerith and setting up a certain amount of a relationship with her. Given, you know, the thing that happens, they really maximize their screen time together. Now, from a gameplay standpoint, would I have liked to seen Cid in Rebirth? Actually, I'm gonna say no. My reasoning is that given the pace of improvements that Remake's aerial combat was laughably bad, to Rebirth, where the aerial combat was actually like okay to mildly good, that if we keep progressing at this same pace, then part 3 is going to have incredible aerial combat. And so I want Cid to be fully designed around the incredible aerial combat of part 3, then rather than try to like design him around like the current implementation that's in Rebirth. All right, now that I've talked about Cid, let's talk about Vincent's implementation, because it is much more suspect, to be honest. I actually really love Vincent's introduction in chapter 11. You meet him in a room, obviously an homage to the original. You talk to him, and then you leave, and then you have a boss fight with him. The boss fight's really cool too. And then he doesn't join you, which throws you off. And then you kind of forget about it because like all the Roche stuff happens immediately outside the Shinra Manor. And then you just go walk off, and you're like, man, Vincent didn't join me. And then he shows up like to board the tiny Bronco, and I'm like, that's the kind of subversion of expectation stuff I love about these games. So Vincent does join you in chapter 12 for the gold saucer stuff, but unlike Cid, Vincent doesn't really have as much direct utility Like, he just kind of stands around a lot. Really, most of his direct utility comes with the Nibelheim stuff in Chapter 11. There's actually some side quests that involve him. Now, the way that the game tries to hand-wave Vincent not being playable, they really play up the loner aspect of him, that he just kind of wanders off, does his own thing, and really he only has one goal. Now, I do think that excuse is maybe a little bit flimsy, but it is kind of understandable when, say, we're in Chapter 12 and in Costa del Sol, and I don't think Vincent wants to spend, like, 50 hours with us doing all the remaining side quests that are available in the game. But it's way more suspect when Vincent literally says out loud, I have business with Sephiroth, and he's not there for the final battle at all. He's there holding open the Whisper portal going into the Forgotten Capital, and he's there at the end of the game, but any of that like hour or two in between, he's not there. He's not there in the background. I couldn't find him. He's not there as like an additional NPC character fighting against Genova or any of the Sephiroth forms. Absolutely nothing. Wow, I can't believe Rebirth is so accurate to the original FF7 that Vincent is such an afterthought in the climax of the game. It's really weird because the whole final boss sequence feels written in a way where I feel like they could just retroactively put Vincent in and it wouldn't be weird at all. Like, you could have him be playable, and you could have some, like, inserts of him doing, like, his own cool thing, and he would join the party and be part of your lineup and stuff. But if that's the case, why didn't they just make him playable now? Apparently developers really prefer Zack over Vincent, I guess, and he got priority. The only way that Zack getting priority over Vincent makes any sense in my head is that seems like the AI character thing would be way too awkward to try to do again. I guess for whatever playstyle that they wanted to give Vincent wasn't maybe ready yet, or they didn't want to try to like overload people with the tutorials and stuff, because even though Zack gets introduced in the final battle, you can very easily ignore his charge mechanic and just mash and not have to worry about it on the lower difficulties, whereas Vincent's mechanic might be way more complicated, and trying to do that and a final boss battle at the same time might not be super duper ideal. But it gets even weirder when you stop and consider how much time Vincent is spending with particular characters with the little screen time that he does have. So the two characters that Vincent has one-on-one interactions with are Cloud with the Queen's Blood stuff. The one side quest Vincent has in the Nibelheim basement, he is paired up with Barrett. Yeah, Barrett. And they explore Barrett's fear of ghosts, and they spend the whole side quest like hunting down this weird noise that's in the basement.
Me? Scared? I ain't been scared a day in my life. I was even voted bravest buddy back in the day.
Of course you were.
Absolutely brilliant play by the writing team. Have Vincent spend time with Barrett, which he could do, I don't know, maybe the entire next game, instead of spending time with Aerith, who is very short on time. Vincent, I feel, could totally be playable in Rebirth without really any major issues. It's more of a matter of if he's designed or not. There's nothing really about the core game design where I'm like, no, I'd rather he be saved for the next game. Really, the only issues I could see is maybe stuff related to his limit breaks and his transformations and how any of that works, but clearly the developers already have a solution for that. So anyways, guys, that's it for the video. I actually wrote this segment as part of like a longer sort of narrative video, but it just got kind of too unwieldy from the topic, and I just decided to kind of sort of turn it into its own video for a little bit easier consumption. Anyways, if you like this video, hit like. If you want to see more FF7 Rebirth content, hit subscribe. If you want to comment, talk about your thoughts on Vincent and Cid's implementation in Rebirth, comment down below. If you want to give me some money to keep doing videos like this, hit up my Patreon down in the description.